Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Garrity.
And welcome, everyone, to the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Along with Jim Garrity of National Review, I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives as we wrap up the week. And, Jim, we start with the good, and we start with the big event of Thursday night, the Republican presidential debate in Miami. It's the last debate, potentially, for the primary season, but it's certainly the last one before voters head to the polls in some critical states come Tuesday, including the winner-take-all states of Florida and Ohio. So with so much on the line, you would have absolutely thought the gloves were coming off, perhaps cutting down a little bit on the personal attacks, but really going at it over policy. Didn't happen. It was a very substantive debate in a number of ways. The focus was on policy rather than personal insults. But for candidates hoping to distinguish themselves from Donald Trump, not sure that they got what they wanted. How are we turning this into a good martini? Well, we've made it through 11 debates. I think we all deserve credit for that. And if this is as good as the other candidates are going to give Donald Trump, it might as well be the last one. Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz went after him on policy to some extent, but they both agonizingly avoided any sort of dust-up with him. Rubio certainly did, and Cruz at one point was talking about how Hillary Clinton only wanted to shore up Social Security through dealing with waste, fraud, and abuse, which is exactly the Trump plan. Dana Bash says, so are you saying that Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump have the same approach here? And Cruz, all teed up for him, says, well, I'll let Donald speak for himself. So missed opportunities galore.
One good martini is that this might mean the debates are over. And we get our Thursday nights back, and we get to watch better television than this. Look, in some ways, this was a really good debate. If you liked hearing about trade policy and entitlement reform and foreign policy, look, this was a substantive debate. This was about gotten to the details of policy. And so in some ways, for a long time, we'd kind of argued that this would be the kind of format that would really hurt Donald Trump. And I don't think it really did, even though he looked very bad. He had a lot of answers that did not go well for him. He kind of, at one point, referred to the Tiananmen Square riot and how, the Chinese authorities had to put that down. At one point, he said this very strange, he said, look, when I said the Chinese crackdown in Tiananmen Square was strong, I didn't mean strong as a good way. Strong doesn't always mean good, which is kind of the argument, against Trump's candidacy right then and there. You're right. There was a lot of missed opportunities. If this is how it's going to be, maybe this was the right closing note, that everybody was at their more or less at their best. I've not been a big fan of John Kasich, but I think he had some good moments. And basically, I think he's really on track to be president of Ohio, Greg. Ted Cruz being strangely unaggressive towards Trump. All four of these guys seemed to go into this thinking they were front runners. And it was only correct for one of them. And what's more, Rubio really needs to win Florida. And so you figured he might have done everything he could to go after the guy who was leading most of the polls in Florida. And that's Donald Trump, and he really didn't. I think the lesson was that Rubio really feels like the kind of in the gutter Don Rickles insult style didn't work well for him. Obviously, he had a really lousy couple of primaries this week. I think he didn't like who he was, and that it's not his style. It's not what built him up. It's not what put him on the national stage, and so he decided to not do that, which is fine. And if this is his last debate, he gets to end it the way he wants to end it in the style that fits him most. I don't know if that necessarily helps. His team obviously feels very good about Florida. We'll see what happens Tuesday. At one point, particularly for that first half hour, Greg, I felt like I was watching the game come out at halftime, and both teams started out in victory formation. With 3 downs and then punting to each other. It was very strange. Everybody's afraid to do something. A little more back and forth later on, but nothing like there had been before. And again, if you're leading, you're fine with that. If you're not leading, as 3 of these guys are, you need to do something different. And I'm not sure it worked out well for them.
The Denver Broncos did win a Super Bowl recently by intentionally going 3 and out and punting, but that's not necessarily the way to win in politics. And we'll see what the results show, because there's a lot on the line, a lot at stake on Tuesday in a lot of different states. Big delegate hauls, not just those 2 states, North Carolina and Illinois as well, although it's not technically winner take all in those. So on to the bad martini now, and Donald Trump pretty much spoiled his own surprise last night at the debate by announcing that Ben Carson, who recently got out of the presidential race, was going to endorse him this morning, and that's exactly what happened. But Jim, little walk down memory lane here. It was last November where Ben Carson started to kind of surge in the polls in Iowa, and a couple polls even had him ahead. That's when Donald Trump decided to go after Ben Carson's story about how he'd been a troubled youth in Detroit and tried to hit his mother with a hammer, called himself pathological, and even tried to stab his cousin, but thankfully the belt buckle got in the way. Here's what Trump said at the time about Carson in his book, referring to himself as pathological.
Pathological is a very serious disease. And he said he's pathological. Somebody said he has pathological disease. Other people said he said in the book, and I haven't seen it, I know it's in the book, that he's got a pathological temper or temperament. That's a big problem because you don't cure that. That's like, I could say, they'd say you don't cure, as an example, child molester. You don't cure these people.
Compare him to a child molester. So then he takes it into the rally in Iowa.
How stupid are the people of Iowa? How stupid are the people of the country to believe this crap?
Then, on the very same day as the debate before Super Tuesday, so just a couple of weeks ago, I spoke with Bob Dees, who was the chairman of the Carson campaign, and this was before Rubio and Cruz decided to get more aggressive towards Trump. This was what the Carson campaign said was the difference between their candidate and the frontrunner.
And the question we have to ask the American people are, do we want volume or do we want values? Do we want wisecracks or do we want wisdom? Do we want wild proclamations or do we want common sense policy solutions?
So obviously when it came time for Ben Carson to endorse today, he endorsed Donald Trump. And here are the reasons why, Jim, which probably might trouble you even more than the endorsement itself. First of all, apparently there's more than one Donald Trump.
There are two different Donald Trumps. There's the one you see on the stage, and there's the one who's very cerebral, sits there and considers things very carefully. You can have a very good conversation with him. And that's the Donald Trump that you're going to start seeing more and more of right now.
And what about all those horrible things he said about you?
And some people said, he said terrible things about you. How can you support him? Well, first of all, we buried the hatchet. That was political stuff. That happens in American politics.
Yeah, people just accuse each other of molesting children or being like a child molester in American politics. Happens all the time, Jim. So we started off with really, really wanting to like Ben Carson, not sure if he was ready to be president. Then he wouldn't leave. Now he's endorsing Trump. He's making it harder and harder.
One of the bitter forms of satisfaction I've gotten this very depressing election cycle, Greg, has been watching Carson supporters see who their guy really is. They were frustrated. They saw how he was not, it was not going well for him, but he hung around. He kept saying, we're going to do a lot better in South Carolina. We're going to do a lot better in these states. And it never worked out particularly well at all. And in fact, it kept going worse and worse. Raise the point, like for a guy who's supposedly so wise, supposedly such good judgment, such an honest man, such a decent Christian man, he's still asking people for donations after coming fifth in a five-man race. He just kept doing this over and over again. Seeing him endorse Trump, there was just another round of one-time Carson supporters kind of looking on in horror as the guy who talked all about character, right? Who talked all about how we had to improve the nation's character, what values we stood for, and how much and how he just turns around and endorses the guy who I think seemed to epitomize everything that Ben Carson told us he was running against. And then kind of the last thing, so you realize his pitch is that here's the good news, America. Everything you're seeing from Donald Trump is a lie. He's a totally different person. He's been lying to you the whole time. And I've seen the real Donald Trump. And I like that guy a lot better. So I'm into what? What? This is the worst endorsement ever. Somewhere Chris Christie's looking at that and saying, man, that guy looks really uncomfortable. He had that same hostage tape, posture today. But the funny thing is, like, within a couple of minutes, you could tell Ben Carson had fooled himself into thinking, oh, no, I always loved this guy. He was always great, and he's going to be a great leader, I don't know if this means that Ben Carson now becomes the dean of the Trump University Medical School, or whether there's Veep talk and all that kind of other stuff. But the degree to which, how quickly Ben Carson forgave, and by the way, apparently Ben Carson is still irked about the Ted Cruz and the rumor in Iowa. So it's this very strange criteria of what Ben Carson will forgive and not forgive. It's just very strange and odd, and I was one of those guys who was a little underwhelmed with Ben Carson from the beginning. I wrote the Manitech story. I was one of those guys who's always looked at him a little skeptically. I think we're going to look at this and we're going to say, oh, Herman Cain makes a lot more sense. That he was the front runner for about a month than Ben Carson. And it's
9-9.
There you go.
Oh, man. Well, I think the thing ultimately, Jim, as we shift to our crazy martini, that Carson was attracted to was the honesty and integrity that's inherent in the Trump campaign. As our crazy martini is a follow-up to yesterday's crazy martini, when we talked about how campaign manager Corey Lewandowski roughed up Michelle Fields of Breitbart Tuesday night following the press conference after Trump scored a couple of primary victories. It was the Washington Post reporter that actually identified Lewandowski as the one who grabbed her arm and nearly pulled her to the ground. Lewandowski, as reported by the Daily Beast, admitted to them that he had done it, but he thought it was a different reporter who was more hostile to the Trump campaign. So, of course, that makes it okay. Now, because there's apparently no video of this, or at least the Trump campaign doesn't think so, they've decided it didn't happen at all. Here's the statement that came out yesterday afternoon from Hope Hicks, who is the spokesperson for the Trump campaign. Quote, the accusation, which has only been made in the media and never addressed directly with the campaign, is entirely false. As one of dozens of individuals present as Mr. Trump exited the press conference, I did not witness any encounter. In addition to our staff, which had no knowledge of said situation, not a single camera or reporter of more than 100 in attendance captured the alleged incident. This individual has never met Corey, nor had the only reporter that supposedly identified him. And, of course, they go on then to say that Michelle Fields has fabricated other stories, including being roughed up by the New York City police officers during the Occupy protests, which there are pictures of. So that's pretty easy to prove. So, Jim, it's kind of a disturbing takeoff of pick or it didn't happen. And apparently one of two things happened. The Corey Lewandowski retroactively didn't grab her and drag her to the ground, or he did actually grab somebody who he didn't like, and now there's a confusion over which reporter he actually assaulted.
Yeah, one kind of wrinkle to add to this, according to Independent Journal Review, Michelle Fields has filed a criminal complaint against Corey Lewandowski, the campaign manager for Trump. She's filed assault charges with the police department in Jupiter, Florida, which is the jurisdiction where the alleged incident occurred. Now, maybe the cops will get to the bottom of this. We do have the account of the Washington Post reporter, and there was an audio recording of their conversation immediately afterwards, in which neither one is saying, oh, let's cook up this story to hurt Trump. It's like, what the heck happened there? I can't believe he did that, things like that. Exactly the sort of conversation you'd expect to have. If a campaign manager had either, physically grabbed or nearly knocked over, done something physically inappropriate. So, I have a feeling there's more chapters of this story to be written. If you find a certain thuggish dishonesty to the Trump candidacy, perhaps it's not just the candidate, perhaps it's the entire culture over there. This is how these people operate. And we'll see how it shakes out. But I have a feeling that this is a story that's not going to go away anytime soon, even though Trump held a press conference today with Ben Carson and not a single question about this. So, way to go, media.
Yeah. He did get asked about it in the spin room last night and promptly denied it. So, Jim, it's been a thoroughly depressing week on a number of fronts politically. Let's hope it gets better next week, but I'm not sure we have reason to think it will.
Tune in Monday, people. Can it get better? Can it get worse? We're going to see.
Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us. And yes, you can't miss it now. Tune in Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.